Thank you so much, Tariq. Again, this is the kickoff for the conference, which will be in September. So you've got to remember what's so important for us is that you're coming out here tonight to fill out this survey. That's on the back, like the last fold of the survey, is extremely important because this is the one where we get a sense of who the young people are, who the people are in general in our community, and what some of the basic issues are that we're being confronted with when it comes to housing, employment, education. This little last flap that you have here, we need that ripped off and returned to us before you leave. Especially because it also indicates which one of the workshops you think you might like to help plan for us in September. Okay, so we're putting you here to work. So for those of you who might be graduating this semester, you can still come back in September to help. That's the point of the scholar. We don't want you to leave school and think that your commitment to the community is gone because you're done with school, because it's not. You have to come back in September. Okay? So make sure you fill out which workshop you're interested in helping with. With that said, I'd like to now introduce Councilman Baraka, who, again, this was his brainchild. Please give him a round of applause.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. I know somebody probably forced y'all to come in. But your teacher, your professor, those of you who get a better grade if you showed up, tell them I said thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
The important thing, though, is that you're here. What we have to do is try to get more folks to be here, more students to be here. I'm going to commit to bringing some of my students from Central High School to come. A couple of my students spoke at the budget meeting last night without being told or said they were going to get an A or whatever it is. They showed up because when you give people social consciousness, they begin to take responsibility for their own selves. So one of my juniors stood up and spoke and said, I'm a junior in high school at Central High School. If you cut $500,000 from the budget, what does that mean for me next year? Which is a very direct and simple question, but it's also political. It's a very political question. It might seem simple to folks, but it's political because it directly speaks to resources and how those resources are being allocated to his community, to his family, to his school. So it speaks directly to that. And I know in college, sometimes, and I just have to say this before I get into what we're doing, sometimes, like presently, a lot of things are really cultural. It's important for it to be cultural, but when you take the politics out of the cultural thing, that's simply just what it is. It's just another song, another dance, another piece of art, another celebration. But if it's not centered around anything that's political, when I mean political, I'm not talking about electoral politics, because electoral politics is just one part of what is political. It's actually just one part of this democracy that you're supposed to be involved in, right? So most of us are here because we're happy that we say we're involved in a democracy, but we're not engaged in it. So we really are not taking part of it in any capacity whatsoever. Things are happening to us, and we're not involved in whether we are directing what happens to other people in the world, what happens to us in our community. So we're not actively engaged in that process. And one thing I want to reiterate what Alex Reed talked about was just, my father talks about the Sisyphus syndrome all the time. The story of the Greek guy, the guy was cursed to roll a rock up the hill only to have it roll back down on his head. And that's basically what Tariq was getting at. Most of the time during history, you'll see the ebbs and flows. When there's been struggle or gains, there's always a movement right after that to push the gains backwards. So right after slavery, the slave codes came about. The Klan was developed after slavery, not during slavery. So after slavery, the Klan became necessary to kind of put black people back on the plantation after slavery ended. So there was a whole, and it's just not a physical movement, it became a political movement, because the physical movement is just terror. Because we're talking about terrorists, the first terror that we witnessed was the Klan, the first hoods that you know, I know about it, the hoods the Klan had on. So that kind of physical terror is what tried to physically force you onto the plantation. But there was also legal and extra legal kind of things that were also enacted to put people back onto the plantation. Slave codes, loitering laws, and vagrancy laws, and laws of wandering. Some of these laws that exist today created a political atmosphere where you have elected officials and people in charge of institutions that force us back into a slavery kind of mode. Right after Reconstruction, he talked about Hayes-Tilden, 1877. That's debated now historically whether that actually took place. But what we do know is that the troops left the South. So the troops were in the South. So historians debate whether there was an actual compromise between Rutherford B. Hayes and Tilden, whether there was a compromise between the Democratic and Republican Party to allow this guy, Rutherford B. Hayes, to be the President of the United States. So what we do know for a fact is that prior to that, there were troops in the South because the troops had to maintain civility. Because without troops, I just told you they were trying to force people back into slavery, so they needed troops. So once the troops left the South, you know, all of the gangs that took place in the South were immediately rolled back on, and it became known as the Solid South. So the South became solid after Reconstruction. You know, and during Reconstruction, we probably had the most African-American elected officials in this country. In that time period, all the way up, there was a gap between that time all the way up to present day. So you had a whole period of American history where blacks and definitely no Latinos were represented at all in American politics in any kind of capacity. During Reconstruction, you had black government.